episode 37 of the Mental Breakdown. I'm Dr. Berney.
I'm Dr. Richard.
Happy New Year, Richard.
Happy New Year. Thank you very much.
It's good to be back.
Air high five.
It's been a little while since we've been on the air.
It has. It has a couple of weeks. Right?
Yeah, we took a couple of weeks off. Not because we intended to take a couple of weeks off, and not because we didn't work for the last couple of weeks, because we certainly did that. But we just haven't had the time because of our schedules to be able to get in, because of the new things and the unexpected things that the holidays bring up. So,
and we knew other listeners were busy with the holidays, visiting, off schedule.
I'm sure they were.
So we thought, well, let's wait until everybody's back, and we'll renew our relationship with you.
And here we are back.
And we're back.
So, Happy New Year to you, Richard, and to everybody else that's listening, and which is perfect for our topic today. The title of today's episode is Happiness, plain and simple.
Right. It comes a little bit from one of our listeners who happened to tune in during our pre-Christmas, pre-holiday shows, where we talked about how to manage the holidays better. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, all that was good. She appreciated everything we said, helped her a lot, making some decisions about her own family. But she said, now that we're entering a new year, will you guys be talking about how to make the new year better?
Right.
And we thought, so we started talking about that. What advice can we give, pass along to our listeners about how to make 2016 better? So we're going to begin with
happiness.
The topic of happiness.
Right? Happiness. Mm-hmm. Because when we're happy, all is good. All is good.
That's right.
So we did a little bit of research because, what is happiness?
That's right. It's one of those topics, where you say, what exactly is it?
Yeah.
I mean, you assume you know what it is until you start talking about it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's like motivation. How do you make happiness? You can artificially generate happiness. You can pretend to be happy, but where does happiness come from, and how do we make it happen more? How do we create it and make it more of a part of our life? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So in looking at happiness, I'm going to tell you that I learned a lot from the research that we did on happiness.
I did too. I'm excited about this topic.
Yeah, because I talk to my patients a lot, and I know you do the same. We talk to our patients a lot about being happy. We tell them that what our goal is in therapy is to help them to be happy and help them to live the life that they enjoy living. And that helps with depression, and it helps with anxiety, and it helps with a lot of those other conditions that we often experience throughout life. And we give our patients specific strategies and things like that, but I've never really sat back and thought about what constitutes and what generates the feeling of happy.
Right.
And so we did a little bit of research, and what we found is some very interesting stuff, because there, of course, has been some very specific research done on these topics.
Yeah, especially in the last 15 to 20 years. There's been an explosion since 2000.
Right.
There's really been in fact, we have some numbers. There were, in 2000, so this has been since 2000 that we've had this explosion, because in 2000, there were 50 books addressing happiness. 50
books published to address the issue
about
of happiness.
Right. Okay. In 2008, there were 4,000 books.
Just 8 years later.
8 years later, there were 4,000 books, and that's increasing. So it's really been in the last 15 years that we've seen this explosion in this whole area of happiness.
Yes.
What we call positive psychology, or we call happiness. But you made a good point. People come to us when they are sad.
Right.
We see plenty of people who have had a marriage breakup or a relationship breakup or some other loss that they've experienced. They've been sad. So we have this urge to end the unhappiness.
Right.
But where are you going to take them?
Right.
When you say, okay, we're going to make you less unhappy, where is happiness? And what do we really want to accomplish with them? And it's something we don't spend a lot of time thinking about.
Right.
What is happiness?
And how do they sustain it?
Right.
And that's because that's the challenge that a lot of people have is, we can do isolated things, and, going to the movies makes me happy. Mm-hmm. But, the movie only lasts for 2 hours, and it's, in today's age, it costs a fortune to go to the movies too often. And so it's not like something that you can do every day.
Right.
So how do you sustain it?
Right.
And so that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today.
Right. And you made an excellent point in your introductory comments about, can you create happiness?
Right.
Can you take, if you're feeling less than happy, can you become happier? Or if you are sad, can you become happier? Is it possible to create happiness?
Right.
It's an important issue that we want to talk about today. Can you create it?
Yes. So let's start out with the foundation. Okay, and so what we found is that there are a number of psychologists and researchers who have looked at this topic. One of those psychologists is Sonia Lyubomirsky.
We think.
I think that's how you pronounce it.
It's a strange spelling, but it looks like Lyubomirsky is how.
And Dr. Sonia, if you're listening,
we're
sorry if
we send a two-pronged apology.
But I'm just going to call her Dr. Sonia.
Dr. Sonia.
She talks about the happiness, what is quote the happiness set point. And what she says, she wrote a book called The How of Happiness, and she breaks it down like this. She says that her research suggests that 50% of happiness is genetic. Okay, let's just start there. 50% of your happiness comes from genetics. So let's talk about what that means, because certainly we can't dissect and look at what how our genetics look. You can't look at your genetic code and say, oh, there's a happiness gene, there's happiness, and there's happiness. And conversely, you can't look at it and say, oh, look, this person is going to be unhappy because of their genetic code. We're not talking about that type of genetic predisposition. So what are we talking about? Usually, when we think about genetic predisposition, we're talking about our biology and our temperament. Now, we'll spend just a second on temperament, because a lot of these things are things that you can't readily change. You can't adjust this just at will. You can't say, okay, I want to start having a different temperament. You can work on it. Some of the new research is coming out to say that you can change it, but it takes a long period of time and a lot of work. So temperament is, any of you who are parents out there know that temperament is something that you're born with. You have a child, and before too long, within a couple of weeks probably, what type of temperament your child has. And what we know as developmentalists is, as the child develops, we see that temperament continue through the developmental phase. And in fact, there is a lot of research and writing to suggest that temperament becomes one of the influencing factors for personality as we become an adult. So temperament stays with us. That temperament is in some way gauged by our biology, the amount of neurotransmitters that we present, the way in which our brain is structured, the number of neuroreceptors that our brain has. There are some aspects of our temperament that is predetermined based upon our biology.
That's right. There are some children who are anxious even as young babies. They really have no reason to be anxious. Not enough has happened to them yet. But they just happen to have a very low threshold for stress, any kind of stress, hunger, pain, temperature changes, and they react to their environment with much bigger emotions than other children.
Right.
Okay. It's just the way their brain works. The relative amount of neurochemicals in their brain, and the way their brain is structured.
Yeah.
Okay? And we have these variations among people, and those variations, the inborn tendencies, we call temperament.
Right. Right. And again, as we develop and as we grow up, it is very often that underlying temperament that we are born with transfers and influences what then becomes our personality.
That's right.
And so, when you get down and you look at it, for those of us who have had the opportunity to work with people from the time they were children until they became adults, you can still see remnants of that early temperament present in their adult personality.
That's right. How a person responds to his or her environment doesn't change very much across time.
Right.
I mean, if you're hyper-reactive as an infant, you tend to be hyper-reactive as a teenager, and you tend to be hyper-reactive as an adult.
Right.
It just, how you respond to your environment doesn't change very much over time. That's what we call temperament.
Right. And it's also what we call personality. I was, just before we sat down to do this podcast, I was on the phone with a couple of attorneys, and we were talking about personality. And I was just telling them the same thing, that, your personality is the lens through which you see the world. Mm-hmm. And, to change that, it's equatable to saying, that ball that you think is red is really blue. Right. And trying to convince you that it's blue. Mm-hmm. It is really difficult to change some of those things because it is just the way that you see the world.
That's right.
And it's very difficult to alter because it's just the inset way of thinking.
Right.
So because that begins with temperament, again, it's one of those things that has been there for so long, and it just makes it relatively immovable. Mm-hmm. Right. And all of you listening can see, hopefully, from some of your experiences, how this relates to happiness. Right. We all know those people. We may be one of these types of people ourselves, where when we encounter stress, or when a person that we know encounters stress, despite how dire a situation may look, they are always positive. They're always saying, you know what, it's going to work out. It's just going to be fine. Yeah, but you got this huge report coming up and you haven't even been able to start it yet. No, it's going to work out. I'm going to get it done and it's going to be fine. They're not delusional because we have to, of course, rule that out. But they're not delusional. They're just positive, optimistic. They see things in a positive light. People who can be talking to you about these really bad things that may have happened in their life, but then right after that, they're able to tell you a joke, and they're able to laugh, and they're able to seem as though they're enjoying life. These people, their genetic predisposition is much more positive, much more happy, if sticking with our theme, than someone who is on the other end, who is much more pessimistic, who sees negative in everything, who always has that expectation of bad, the person that is unhappy. So we all know those people who, even when something great is going on, they say, yeah, but it's just not going to last.
You won the lottery, but think of all those taxes I have to pay now.
Right. Yeah, it's like you just, come on, the Powerball is, what, 600 and something
800 million. No, it's like almost $1 billion. It's like 700 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's approaching $1 billion.
Oh,
I'm going to win it. I'll give you
have to pay $500 million in taxes.
Really, I would lose sleep over having to pay the taxes on $1 billion. I would. That would bother me so much. I don't know what I would do.
But that's the difference between somebody who is predispositioned to be happy. Predisposed to be happy versus a person who's predisposed to be more negative.
I want to pay a huge tax bill. Because I get to keep most of it.
That's right. So we can see where this comes from, because a lot of these examples that we're given, it's not based upon situations, because a lot of us respond to similar situations in similar ways. Mm-hmm. It's sort of that underlying predisposition that they have. Right. It's the underlying person that they are, and that's what they bring genetically to it.
Right, and we're going to pound away at this issue of 50% is genetics, because we have to be careful not to be too hard on ourselves or not to expect too much from ourselves, because there are just parts of this that we just can't do anything about. Number one, okay? Right. So don't beat yourself up too badly about this, because parts of this you're not going to be able to change. But secondly, you have to know where you are on this happiness scale. Right. Because if you tend to be on the other side of happy, if you tend to move toward the sad side of that, then you might have to work a little bit harder. So it's important to know that 50% of happiness is determined by your biology, and then you have to use that knowledge to make life decisions. And I think that's probably where you're going to take this is, okay, so if 50% is here, where's the other half?
Right. And so, let's jump over to the other half because there is a whole other half that we have some control over. Right. We don't have control over our genetics.
Don't have control over half of it.
There is this idea of epigenetics, and we don't want to discount that. There is the idea of epigenetics, which means the way in which we can influence our genetics, our genetic expression, based upon some decisions that we make. But again, it leads back to those decisions.
That takes a pretty big wallop to change. Epigenetics is a pretty powerful.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to change your genetic code.
Right.
I mean, it can be changed, but we're talking about things like abuse and real significant life-changing events might change your code, your DNA. But in general, you're not going to change this stuff.
Right. Not too much. All right. So when we move over to the other 50%, the 50% that we have some decision-making power over, that side is divided a little bit more. All right. And so let's start off with the 10%. Okay. 10% of that remaining 50% of the pie. That 10% is your life circumstances. Okay, so this is your job, maybe your marriage or your relationship. These are the things that is just your current situation right now. You know, how much money you have in the bank, your salary, your bills, all of those things. And that's a lot to fit in, but that's impressively, and I think that this is one of the most impressive things that I found from this research, is that that's only 10%.
That was my biggest surprise. I was surprised that half of this is genetics, and the other half is divided between two things.
Right.
And of those two things, only 10% is determined by your salary, your income, where you live, the size of your house, the cars that you drive, all that stuff only contributes about 10% to your happiness. That was a surprise.
Yeah. Now, and so let's spend just a couple of minutes talking about this. Even though it's only 10%, I think that people tend to put much more into this than it deserves.
Right.
And I'm not going to be, I don't think that we should be, sort of utopian about it and say, well, money doesn't matter. Because it does. There is a big difference between making $5,000 a year and $50,000 a year. There's a big difference in that. And in fact, what the research really suggests is, from a happiness perspective, absolutely. There is a difference between a person who makes $5,000 a year and a person who makes $50,000 a year on the happiness scale.
$50,000 makes you happier.
$50,000 makes you happier because it takes care of a lot of those stresses and demands, and you can tend to survive relatively well with $50,000 a year. Interestingly, though, if you go from $50,000 a year to $500,000 a year, not much of a difference.
The happiness
ratings
score doesn't change very much.
It does not change that much. And in fact, the happiness sort of range, if you will, is between 50 and 75,000. Everyone in there reports happiness just about the same. And usually that range is there because of cost of living in different places in the United States and things like that. It's much more expensive to live in New York City than it is to live in some rural town or suburban town in Florida or Alabama or something.
Florida.
Right. So there is that range there, but by and large, anything over that sweet spot range there really doesn't matter. And in fact, there is some argument that making that much more, the stress that comes from having to work to make that much more makes you less happy. When you think about the demands that is placed on a person who may have that $500,000 a year salary, the demands on his or her time for work, the stress and pressure on that person for the demands that they have for their job, all of those things contribute to their overall happiness score, and those many times leads to either absolutely no difference between the when compared to the person that makes $50,000 a year, or actually takes them a little bit lower, makes them less happy.
Well, this 10% number is interesting because you're talking about, in this 10%, you're talking about the car that I drive, the house where I live, my income. Interesting. So what you're saying is if you make $50,000, or here in Central Florida, Bartow and Lakeland and Plant City, if you make $50,000 a year, that's not enough in Washington, D.C. Or New York City, but it's enough here. Okay,
right.
So let's stay with the $50,000. With $50,000, you can have a place to live.
Right.
You're not homeless. You can drive a car
right.
that's in reasonably good shape. It's not a clunker. You can buy clothes. You're not without things.
Right.
Okay. You can't take cruises every week, but if you want to save your money, you can take a cruise. You can celebrate holidays. So you can do all the things you want to do, making $50,000 a year. If you make $200,000 a year, you have more cars or a bigger house, and so what you're saying is more things don't necessarily make you happy.
Right.
You have the same things, you just have more of them. Right.
I mean, we have those adolescent ideals that, oh my gosh, I would love to own a Lamborghini.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, the purpose of your vehicle is to get you from point A to point B. Right. You don't need a Lamborghini to do that. So having a Lamborghini to do that doesn't necessarily change your happiness, because once the newness wears off...
well, that's the other point, that we're always happy for a while.
Right.
But no matter what we buy, we don't stay happy.
Right.
I have never made a purchase that keeps me happy for years.
Right.
I might like using it, but it doesn't give me the same joy 3 years from now that it gave me when I first got it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So things don't make you happy. I mean, that's kind of what we're saying.
Right.
And the other irony of this is that what do most people spend their time doing in order to become happy? They spend their time on these 10%.
Right.
Buying things, shopping for things, earning more money. We invest a lot of time in the smallest contributor to happiness.
Correct.
That's
right.
That's where we're spending all of our time. So number one, more things aren't going to make you happy, and investing more time isn't going to buy you much, because you're investing most of your time in the smallest contributor to happiness.
Right. Right.
Interesting.
And we apply assume much more stress about those 10%.
That's right. That's the other part that I had forgotten. So in other words, I'd be better off making $75,000 a year and going fishing once or twice a week than making $100,000 a year and giving up fishing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Cool.
Well, which leads us to the other 40%. All right. So we have 50% is genetics, 10% is these life circumstances. The remaining 40% are our personal outlook, our life decisions, things that we're choosing to do. And I find this absolutely fascinating, because what that is suggesting is that those people that you know that do those really strange things, those people who, why in the world is this guy why is this guy taking a pottery class? There's no purpose for him to take a pottery class. Why is he taking a pottery class? Because it just eats into his schedule and it just makes him unavailable for these other things he needs to do. That is part of the 40%. Doing things that you enjoy, even if it's meaningless, even if it doesn't contribute to your financial well-being, doesn't contribute to your social relationship well-being necessarily, though I'll talk more about social relationships in just a second. Doing things for the sake of doing those things that make you happy, that's the 40%.
I love to take my daughter. One of my kids likes to fish, my youngest daughter. I just love going fishing with her. And the secret is that I love being with her. I love to fish. I mean, I just love doing it. But the whole time I'm there, I'm thinking, I really should be working right now.
Right.
But I'm having so much fun that I stay.
Right.
So finally I've had to admit, geez, I love to fish.
Right.
So you're telling me I should do more of it.
Yeah. Because, what we find, and you've had this experience as I've had, as has we were talking about this before we sat down to do the podcast, and we were prepping this morning. There have been many times in my life where the work that I do, the salary that I make, those expectations, life circumstances, that 10%, are overwhelming, and it's stressful. But what is very, very interesting is that when all we have to do is introduce one little thing that falls into that 40%. Like I used to have be in a situation where that 10% stuff was very stressful. It was tough. It was tough to get up to go to work. I didn't want to. The demands that my department chair put on me were, in my opinion, unnatural. I don't think anybody could meet his expectations. But
he did set a high bar.
Yeah, he did. Very high bar. But what I found is that when I would get with my friends and I would say, hey, this weekend, why don't we do a barbecue? Mm-hmm. That made the week far easier to manage because I had something to look forward to. I had this expectation, this anticipation of this good time, and that made the stress from the 10% far less, and I found myself to be much happier. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, at that time, I did not connect those things. I did not. I connected that I really look forward to having these good times, but I didn't connect the fact that happiness is really coming from these other things that I enjoy doing. Whether it's barbecuing with my friends, or it's going out to the soccer pitch, or it's going out and spending time with somebody that I care about. Those are the things that contribute. From the perspective of those things that we have control over, those are the things that contribute the most to our happiness.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is a soccer pitch where they play soccer?
Oh, yes, that's a soccer field, sorry.
A pitch is a field?
Pitch, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
See?
Sorry for that digression. Soccer pitch. Okay. So in other words, by choosing one of these activities that you enjoy doing,
mm-hmm.
you're going to affect your happiness meter
right
much, much more
right
than if you made a little bit more money.
Right. Yeah, so if you had the option of working, if your job is the way that our jobs usually are, if you had the option of working on Saturday and making an extra couple of $100s for this paycheck, or to go do something you really enjoy with your family, somewhere. If you're thinking about it from a pure happiness perspective, your best bet is to take the day off and go hang out with your family, or go do the thing that makes you happy and not work. Because if you think that, well, if I get this extra couple $100, we'll do something then, most of the time you won't. Most of the time we tend to anticipate, well, if I make this extra money, then I'll do this or I'll do that. And most of the time, we don't do those things.
I had a man tell me that when I was in graduate school. He was almost a dean. He was like an assistant or associate dean. Mm-hmm. And he said, I always thought that if I made $100,000, that I would have it made. And he said, I'm making more than that, but my life hasn't changed that much.
Right.
He said, the quality of my life, he said, I have a newer car. But he said, the quality of my life is, I still live in the same house. I still wear the same kind of clothes. And I'm no happier now than I thought I would be, mm-hmm. but I'm no happier now than I was when I was an assistant professor. In fact, he said, we probably had more fun in those years than I do now because of the added responsibility.
Right.
That's what he was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Right. So when we think about these life choices, this extra 40%, let's kind of clarify a few things about what we're talking about here. We're talking about, as we've already said, some of these hobbies. What do they call them? Just gratification, things we do just for the gratification of doing it. Oftentimes, it's things that really don't matter for anything. I mean, I used to be in martial arts. I did kung fu courses for a while. Ask me how many fights I've ever been, how many times I've ever had to use any of that stuff, how many times I ever hoped to use any of that stuff. 0 on all of those. But it was something that I enjoyed doing because, it helped me in a lot of different ways. It helped me understand my body better and all that kind of stuff. I love movies. Now, watching a movie does very little for me professionally. It does very little for me in a lot of these other ways, but I enjoy doing it. And so I go watch movies. So we do these things, many of these things that fall into this 40%, we do just because we enjoy doing it. They don't serve really any other purpose.
And what we're saying is it's really okay to do that.
Yeah.
In fact, you're going to get more bang for your buck
from a happiness
doing
perspective.
that
Right.
than you are working an extra few hours or working an extra day or working 7 days instead of 5 days.
Right.
Okay.
And now, I guess since you put it that way, I need to mention that we certainly aren't suggesting that you say, well, you know what, it would make me really happy to go to the movies. Oh, in my bank account, I only have $5, but it costs $8 to go to the movies. We're not saying, being financially irresponsible to do some of these things you enjoy, because
Don't
obviously
run up your credit card
right.
chasing happiness.
Obviously, that's going to cause you more stress down the line, and that's not going to help you overall. Mm-hmm. But many of these things, as we're getting into some other examples of what falls into this 40%, there are many things that don't cost anything. Mm-hmm. Spending time with friends, talking to your friends. Right. Sometimes, if they're good friends and they make you happy when you're interacting with them, that can be just as powerful at increasing happiness as anything else. Mm-hmm. Social relationships. For some people, they've done some surveys, and people walking down the sidewalk, feeling as though you're contributing to society at large. So if you're walking and there's trash on the side of the sidewalk, and you pick it up and you throw it in the trash, people who do those kinds of things tend to report greater levels of happiness. Not because they are saying, look at me, I'm being conscientious of our environment, but because they feel as though they're contributing to the overall big picture. So, thinking about those kinds of things, for many people, that includes recycling. For other people, that includes, like I said, picking things up that you see on the side of the road. For other people, that includes going for a bike ride instead of going for a car ride. So it can manifest in a lot of different ways that may or may not cost you a dime. But it's things that help you experience the world in a way that makes you happy.
So these are things that we elect to do.
Right.
It comes under the heading of how do you become happy? Well,
right.
Then work on the 40%.
Right.
Can't do anything about biology. Can't do anything about the... It's not that you can't do anything about the 10%, but it's not going to get you very much spending a lot of time pushing against the 10%.
Right. Because,
okay.
Everybody's not going to be able to go to their employer and say, okay, I need to make $50,000 a year. Right. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Okay. But so... The advice we're giving is spend your time where you're going to get the biggest return, and that's on the 40%.
Right.
And the 40% is your hobbies, your choices, the decisions you make, doing the things that you really want to do. If I really want to be with my children, if that's what makes me truly happy, then that's what I have to do. That's where I should be spending my time. There's another aspect to this, though, and that is that this notion that it's not what happens to us, but it's how we deal with what happens to us.
Right.
And that would come in this 40%.
Absolutely. Our personal outlook.
Right.
Yes.
Because tragedy befalls all of us.
Right.
We lose friends. We move. We lose jobs. So tragedy befalls all of us. It's how you think about and how you react to and how you manage. What choices do you make? What decisions do you make after the tragedy more than the tragedy? You can't do anything about tragedy. It's going to happen. How you deal with it is what's important.
Right. Yeah. And
how you manage your disappointments, how you manage your fears, how you manage stresses.
Right. We talk about that kind of perspective a lot with anger. It's okay to get angry. Right. It's what you do with the anger when you're experiencing it.
That's right.
This is the same thing for tragedy and for other things. Is we all experience this. It's how you deal with it that matters. And so if something negative befalls you, your outlook, your way, your decision of how to deal with that is going to influence your happiness.
So we all get sad periodically.
Right.
Okay. All of us experience sadness. The advice we give is don't try to chase it away. Don't try to put out the sadness fire right away, because sadness also plays a role. I mean, happiness and sadness come together.
Right.
And so there's nothing wrong with being sad once in a while. You can't let sad get in the way of your life.
Right.
You don't, well, I'm sad today, so I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm sad today, so I'm going to be mean to my kids. I'm sad today, so I'm going to quit my job. Okay.
Right.
But you don't have to put out that sadness fire right away.
Right.
But you do have to, but it does matter how you react to it.
Right.
And that's what we're saying, that's in this 40%.
Right.
Right. Okay.
And this should, for many of you, if you are among the majority of people, at least in the United States, you've seen the movie Inside Out. Mm-hmm. And that is the crux of that. Not to be a total spoiler alert, but it's been out long enough, I think, that we can talk about it. In that movie, they talk about just that we can't avoid some of these negative feelings.
Right.
They are a natural part of life. And in fact, those negative feelings sometimes make the positive feelings all that much more powerful, and much more meaningful. Because when you couple, the tragedy of sadness with the elation of happiness, sometimes that combination makes experiences in life so much more meaningful, and so much more memorable and just influential in the other decisions that you make in your life.
That's right. If you find yourself saying, I'm really sad, I'm going to work myself out of this sadness, you're going to do that by doing the things that make you happy.
Right.
So you're really accomplishing both things. You're suppressing your sadness, but you're also creating happiness for yourself. And so the sadness becomes motivational.
Right.
And that's what you have to use these things. Don't sadly, people get sad, and so they reach for alcohol or they reach for a drug. I'm feeling a little down. I think I'll smoke some weed today. You don't need to put out the sad fire, okay?
Right.
The sadness also serves a positive function in getting you motivated to do something about it.
Right.
So don't be in a rush to put out that sadness fire. Don't let it get in the way. But you don't need to be in a rush to put it out. Put it out by doing the things that make you happy. Take your kids fishing.
Right. And that goes with other negative feelings as well. Not just sadness, but anger, frustration, guilt. All these other things.
Yeah, that's true. We tend to be very aggressive about dealing with depression, but when we get these feelings of
anger, irritability,
with anger, we do it with anger. We say, "Well, you can't be angry. You can't express anger." But with sadness, we sort of say, "Well, you better take some drugs." Maybe you don't need medication.
Right.
Maybe you just need to do the things. Rather than reaching for medication, rather than legal or illegal, prescribed or not. Rather than reaching for medication or drugs, reach for those things that make you happy.
Right, and that is very consistent with what some of the newer research is coming out to say about dealing with depression.
Right.
That therapy in many cases is as powerful, if not more powerful, at dealing with depression than SSRIs or antidepressant medications. That the decisions that we make, the choices that we make, the strategies that we use to overcome and deal with those negative feelings, many times that's much more effective and much longer lasting than the benefits of medication.
Right.
There's more and more research coming out to talk about that, much to some people's frustration, because a lot of people rely on things like SSRIs, Prozac, Paxil, and those things to deal with their depression. And some people need the medication. Again, part of that 50%. Remember, we were talking about that a lot of that 50% is your body's biology. And if your body just doesn't make enough serotonin, sometimes you need some help with that. But there are other times you don't.
This brings up a point, and I don't mean to get ahead of us here, but we tend to think that happiness is a birthright. That we're
right.
As we were putting this talk together over the past couple of days, I've thought about Declaration of Independence
Right.
and the pursuit of happiness.
Pursuit.
Okay, not the guarantee, not the assurance, but the pursuit. You're allowed to pursue, and that's the 40%.
Right.
You pursue happiness. Okay, but it made me think of something else. I saw a young woman this week, college student, and she said, I'm really sad all the time now that I'm in college. And I thought, that's strange. College should be this. And she said, college is supposed to be this happy time. And she said, I'm not enjoying it at all. And she said, but when I look at Facebook and I look at other people's pictures, everybody else, it looks like everybody else is having fun. And I'm not. Mm-hmm. And tragically, it made me think of the University of Pennsylvania student about a year ago,
right.
Took her own life because she and her roommate were saying everybody's having fun, but we're not.
Right.
And that's what Facebook makes it look like everybody else is having a good time,
right.
but you're being left out. So we have another dimension to happiness with social media today, that it looks like everybody else is dining in Paris except us.
Right.
Everybody else is skiing in Colorado, but us,
Right.
And that's really not the case, but that's the impression that social media gives you.
Right.
I'm having fun. What are you doing?
Yeah, you have to be cautious about how much and in what ways you expose yourself to that, and how you let it influence your views. Mm-hmm. Because you're right. People tend to fall along two lines on social media. Either it's all negative, or it's all positive.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you're not careful, you're going to be unduly influenced in either direction by what you're exposed to. So you do have to be very cautious about how you expose yourself and engage your own happiness as it relates to that. Many times, as you said, we gauge how we should be feeling based upon what we perceive others to be feeling.
Right.
The just truth to the matter is that a lot of people are really good at faking happy. A lot of people are really good at making it look like they're really happy, even if they're not. They can be completely miserable, but they look like they're having a great time.
If Facebook has done nothing else, it has taught Americans how to smile and look like they really mean it.
Right.
People practice smiling.
Yeah.
I see my own daughter doing that. They practice smiling.
Well, I was at where was I? I was at a restaurant or a sports function or something a couple weeks ago, and I was watching this teenage girl. She had to have taken 15 selfies, trying to get just the right one that she was going to post.
That would be posted. She'd
Right.
get rid of all the others.
Right.
But you remember prom pictures? You got one shot.
That's it.
It had to be good.
And if you blinked, you're done. But now, because of the way things are, you have multiple opportunities to get just the right look that you want. And so anybody who sees her picture on Facebook, or not even Facebook, because she wouldn't dare use Facebook, it would have been Instagram or Snapchat or something, is going to say, oh my gosh, look how happy she is. She's always just so happy.
Best time of her life. Whatever she's doing,
right.
That's as happy as anybody I've seen anybody. No, that was manufactured after taking 45 selfies.
Meanwhile, she's not talking to anybody else sitting there at the table with her. She's leaning back in the chair, completely disengaged from the people that she's talking to, right. Not eating her food, just taking pictures of herself.
Angry about being there. That's right. She didn't want to go in the first place.
That's right.
She has to be with her family.
So we see these things, and we compare ourselves to this. Man, I could never look that happy.
Especially if you're sitting home alone looking at these pictures at 9 o'clock on a Friday night.
Right.
You're home alone on Friday and she's having the time of her life.
Exactly.
Manufactured happiness.
Yes. So the bottom line, the moral of the story, if you will, is happiness is composed of many different things. Our genetics play a role. We can't do much about that, but it's important to know that for some of us, we have to battle against that. For some of us, of that 50% that is contributed by genetics, only it may be outweighed by unhappiness. We may be the type of person that's generally more pessimistic. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, you need to recognize that that's the case. Acknowledge that in yourself, that, you know what, I have this tendency.
Right.
We'll deal with it with the other 40% that you can control. But we need to recognize that. The 10%, let's not spend so much of our emotional, mental energy stressing and being overwhelmed and being frustrated by that. As you said earlier, Richard, there are many times, many situations, most of you listening have no control over that 10%. What is your option? You're unhappy with your job, you can quit, or you can stick it out. Well, for most of us, quitting is not an option.
Right.
We just can't quit. Now we can do what we can do to look for another job. We can do those things, but other than that, we're stuck. We have to deal with it.
Right.
But so don't emphasize. Don't have that. Don't fall into that tendency to magnify those issues. They're there. Recognize that they're there. But put most of your attention in this last 40%.
Right.
The 40% that we can control, the 40% that we have some ability to manage, because that is our life, our personal outlook. That is our perspective of the world. Those are the things that we are choosing to do because we enjoy doing them. And if we put our attention there, what we'll find is that will far outweigh the stress imposed by that 10%, and it can account for a lot of whatever our genetics is causing us a problem. You know, if our genetics aren't quite there, we can make decisions that make us happier.
You know, there's how much time do we have?
We have about 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay. There's two other points that I want to make here. One is that we haven't really defined happiness.
Right, that's true.
What is happiness? Okay, well, let's talk about what it isn't. Happiness is not banishing sadness or eliminating bad moods. That's not what we mean by happiness.
Right.
Happiness is not banishing sadness, nor is it eliminating bad moods. Those things are okay. Use them. We talked about it a few minutes ago. It's not that. Well, what is it? What is happiness? Happiness is living a meaningful life. You know, where do people come up with a definition of happiness? Well, first of all, you go to all the major religions, you know, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism. They really all define it the same way.
Right.
Happiness is living a meaningful life, using the gifts that you have, physical, intellectual, musical, artistic. It's using the talents that you have. And it's living a life with thought and purpose. Okay, I won't talk about the Kardashians, but they're missing. That's what's missing. When we complain about the Kardashians, what we're saying is theirs is not a meaningful life. They're not using their gifts and their talent, whatever they are, and they're not living with thought and purpose. Okay, successful, making a lot of money, yep, but that's only the 10%, isn't it?
Right.
Okay, so they're not living a meaningful life. So point number one is happiness is living a meaningful life. Now, point number two. This is our New Year's talk.
Yes.
We have not mentioned the word resolution.
That's true.
And we have not mentioned the word resolution because we don't make resolutions.
Right.
None of us here, nobody in this office
Right.
has talked about a resolution.
Right.
And one of the reasons we haven't talked about resolutions is because resolutions don't make you happy.
Right.
Okay? What makes you happy is action toward a goal.
Right.
And the more difficult the goal is, the more satisfaction, the more joy, the more meaningful your life becomes. There's a well-known neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin. His name is Richard Davidson. Been around for years. One of just a world-class neuroscientist. Done some of the original work in brain science. He did research on happiness in the last few years, and what he said was that achieving difficult goals, and he means, you know, set a very high bar, not only activates positive feelings, happiness, it also suppresses negative emotions.
Right.
So you're helping your brain in two ways. By achieving difficult goals. By achieving difficult goals, You activate positive feelings. You suppress, at the same time, you suppress negative feelings. So if you remember the talk we did on motivation?
Right.
And we said, you can't create motivation, but you can increase achievement. And if you increase achievement, you're going to increase motivation.
Right.
If you want to be happy, set some goals for yourself.
Right.
Okay, that's the advice. Because when Dr. Berney and I sat down and say, okay, what are we going to do in 2016? We didn't talk about resolutions. We talked about what our goals were for 2016. So for our practice, we are setting, for our personal lives, we are setting some personal goals.
Right.
And that's what is going to fuel this sense of happiness or this sense of having a meaningful life.
Right.
It's the goals we set, not the resolutions we make.
Yeah.
So in this, we're very proud to say, in this first talk of the new year, we're not talking about resolutions, or we're not talking about that kind of happiness. We're talking about setting high goals, achieving those goals, and bringing meaning to your life.
Right. And as you're working towards those goals, the achievement that you were talking about, the satisfaction, the happiness comes as you hit those milestones that show that you're working towards your goal.
And you did that in 2015 with your food plan. Not your diet, with your food plan.
Right.
As you achieved those goals,
right.
You didn't make a resolution in January.
Right.
You set some goals during the year, and as you achieved those goals, you got really happy about it.
Exactly. And that happiness, again, if we're going to think about motivation, that happiness fuels motivation. It fosters motivation. It gets you energized, gets you going.
I might add, he's become unbearable for the rest of us because now he's running marathons and doing all this other stuff that none of us can keep up with. But that's what it does.
Right.
I think you're a classic. It's absolutely a classic example of what it means to be truly happy, and that is that you set these goals, you achieve these goals, and then in achieving them, it propelled you, it motivated you to the next level.
Right.
Now you're doing things physically that you couldn't do a year ago, 8 months ago.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what. And imagine what a gift this would be to give to our children.
Right.
We think about it for ourselves, but imagine telling your children, honey, let's sit down and set some goals, help them achieve those goals, and how much better they would feel about themselves.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. And teaching them the pleasure of meeting and succeeding and doing the things that make them happy.
Your son has a goal.
Right.
Not a resolution.
Yeah.
That kid has a goal.
Yeah.
At that age, what is he, 15?
He's almost 15.
He'll be 15 years old in just a few days.
Right.
He has a goal that it's life-changing.
Right.
I mean, at 15, imagine.
Yeah. He's determined.
Mm-hmm.
He's determined that he's going to meet these goals. And what we always hope that we do with our kids is we teach them that. We show them that. And that's how we teach our kids to be happy.
That's right.
That's how we teach them.
It's not from the clothes they wear or the phone. It's not the phone they have, the clothes they wear. It's in achieving these goals that makes you really happy.
Exactly.
What a thing for a kid that age to have. What a lesson to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. So we encourage you to take that and use that in your life, not just for yourself, but for your children, for your loved ones, for other people who need to find happiness as well.
That's right. And if you have questions, if you start to put this together and you hit some roadblocks, give us a call.
Yeah.
Email us, write to us, come in and talk to us. We'll help you work through this so you can set your goals and achieve your goals for yourselves and your children.
Yeah. It's so rewarding. So, a few announcements. Anything else?
No.
Got enthusiastic there. Got energized.
I love this topic.
You were animated.
I love this topic.
With that.
We should thank Miss Cassie for this. Miss Cassie, if you're listening out there, thank you.
Thank you for the topic.
You moved us in this direction, and we're delighted that you did. It was fun to research this topic. It was fun to learn about it. Even more fun to share it with others.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
So a few announcements. One of our goals for this year is to do more work. How about that? There you go.
That's right. One of our goals is to create another day in the week.
If only that was possible.
If we had 8 days, we could get this done.
But what we're going to do is you're going to see a few changes with our podcast starting over the next couple of weeks. As we have always done, we are going to have our Friday morning the Mental Breakdown podcast. Right. We're going to air it live on Mixlr, as we always have. Mm-hmm. But another thing that we're going to add is we are going to add additional podcasts that will be scattered throughout the week, 2 or 3 a week, in addition to this podcast, that's going to respond specifically to listener questions. We do get questions from listeners periodically, and sometimes those questions, they're not questions that necessitate an entire podcast, one of these big podcasts that we do here, but they're important, and they're probably questions that lots of people are wondering about. How do I get my kid to do homework? How do I get my kid to on a schedule? Those kinds of things. And so what we're going to do is we're going to record those. They'll not be on Mixlr, but we're going to record these other podcasts and then release them throughout the week. They'll be shorter podcasts, 10 or 15 minutes or so, but they will be about specific questions from listeners. So if you have questions, if you're wondering about how to implement maybe some of the things that we've talked about, some of the things that you've heard about, and you would like to ask us our opinion on how we would recommend you coping with those things or dealing with those things, write to us. Write your questions, send them to us on our Facebook page, the Mental Breakdowns Facebook page, or you can send it, if you go to our practice website at pacflorida.com, you can send us a message there as well. So you'll see these new podcasts coming out, and hopefully you will find them helpful. Also, here's a quick announcement. In a couple of weeks, actually 2 weeks from yesterday, I believe, on January 21st, we will be hosting our next workshop, our January workshop here we're actually going to have it in-house at our practice in Lakeland. So if you're interested in that workshop is going to be entitled Creating Motivation. And so we're going to spend a couple of hours from 5:30 to 7:30 that evening talking about how you can build motivation and things that you can, very practical things that you can do to help build motivation, not only for yourself, but for your child. We are offering 2 hours of continuing education units for licensed mental health counselors, licensed clinical social workers, and licensed marriage and family therapists here in Florida. So you can register and get those CEUs. It's $15. And if you come in, it'll be a relatively intimate setting, so there won't be a whole lot of people there, so that you can ask lots of questions, and we can really work to help you implement some of these things in your life. If you're interested in that, you can jump on our website, again, pacflorida.com, and click on workshops, and you'll see the registration information there. Or if you have questions, you can just, again, contact us via Facebook or on the website. Any other announcements?
No, just presentations. But do stay in touch. I want everybody to invite everybody to stay in touch. Send us your questions. Let us know what we can do.
One last thing. Mm-hmm. All right. One thing that we did over the last couple of weeks is we put together. Dr. Richard mentioned the diet plan, the food plan that I worked on last year. We took that and we adapted it and put it into a small manual that we actually published on Kindle, Amazon Kindle. It's called the Elimination Diet Manual. It is basically a manual. It doesn't go into all of the background stuff and everything like you get with all of these really heavy-duty diet books, but it basically just gives you the information you need, and it walks you through. It has a diary connected to it that walks you through how to implement an elimination diet to see if there are foods that you're eating, things that you're consuming that may be contributing to some of your anxiety, ADHD symptoms, stress, worry, gastrointestinal problems, or anything like that. And we put that together and we published it. Now, here's how it matters most. For anyone who jumps on iTunes and either writes a comment or leaves a review or does a rating, anyone who does that by next Friday. So today is, we're recording this on the 8th. So for everyone who writes a review and leaves a comment on iTunes, by next Friday, the 15th, we will send you a free PDF of that manual. So if you're interested, jump on the iTunes, leave us a review. We'll be monitoring it, and we will send you a free book.
That sounds good.
Sounds good.
I may do that myself.
All right. So until then, we will talk to you next week. So I'm Dr. Berney.
And I'm Dr. Richard.
Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next time.